Alrighty, so last week we went over the 5 most buffed characters in Smash from release to version 13.0.1, and now comes the episode that I think people are more excited for, either out of curiosity or confirmation bias. Mars, I'm looking at you. For those who are joining us for the first time, I made a video not too long ago talking about 5 characters who received the most amount of buffs from changes in the metagame, for example, fighters who are effective against Steve or Kazuya, or through direct patches. For today, we're going to cover the opposite, which characters started out really strong but have since lost their power, enough to warrant players either dropping them or a noticeable decline in results. Throughout Ultimate's lifetime, more emphasis was placed on buffing weaker characters instead of nerfing stronger ones. They did make an effort to narrow the gap on both ends, but it was more bottom heavy for sure. Despite that, there's a good number of cast members who've seen better days, so let's go through them one at a time. Honorable mentions come first, beginning with Palutena. Some of you may be confused as to why I included her in this video, seeing as her representation is still very solid, with players like Chag, Louis Money, Ruffalo, Chase, and Jen pulling in solid results, but if you remember during the height of 2019, especially with Nairo as the elder statesman of the character prior to his retirement, I distinctly remember several top players ranking her in the top 5 or top 3, on occasions even a contender for the best character in the game, at least until the advent of Fighters Pass 2. Palutena was an incredibly consistent, safe, and well-rounded character who formerly possessed the most powerful neutral air in the game by popular opinion. While she did receive a few helpful buffs, like more kill pressure on up tilt and down smash, several nerfs were inflicted on her to reduce how forgiving she was when making mistakes. Version 11 saw reductions in safety to 3 of her core moves. Dash attack, which has become slightly more punishable due to its higher end lag. Forward air as well in terms of landing lag, it used to be -3 on shield, making it one of the best forward airs in the game, but has since become -5, requiring players to be more precise when landing with it. Standing grab also lost a considerable amount of range, seeing as it's a staple part of her gameplay thanks to her down and back throws, that also hurt a lot. Speaking of throws, down throw gained more knockback scaling, worsening his combo potential. All of these in tandem with the nerfs to her neutral air as an edge guarding tool have decreased her power by a reasonable amount. In fairness, she's still frequently placed in the top 10, but nowhere near as dominant as she used to be. The same also applies to Joker. When Leo was terrorizing 2019 and early 2020, Joker was without a doubt the best character in the game, if only by a small margin. His execution required more handling than Palutena, but when optimized, his wide array of offense and defense made him extremely difficult to contest. So the nerfs to him were aimed at dropping his overall mileage. His downward gun bullets were greatly diminished in reach to the point where he has to be more or less directly above his opponent for the damage to connect. The actual knockback part remains the same, but the nerfs are more visible when using Arsene. Speaking of Arsene, his Rebellion gauge will burn out faster upon taking damage, putting more pressure on Joker to make less mistakes during this time. Furthermore, Iha's ending lag was increased as well, making it less safe to spam in neutral, while Tetracon gained the same increase in end lag, so it would be more risky to use. Admittedly, both Joker and Palutena are still comfortably sitting in the top 10, so the nerfs may be seen as insignificant to most people, but those who play them will spare no expense of their time to vent about how painful those changes really were, and I don't blame them. The worst kinds of nerfs in Smash are utility focused, such as more startup or end lag, smaller hitboxes, things like that. I'm sure most Joker players would rather have lost 5% kill power across the board from Arsene than to lose Arsene faster, or for Iha to do less damage instead of being laggier. Likewise, I'd be willing to bet money Palutena mains would rather have their back throw kill 10% later than to lose range on her grab, or at least I think. So that's it for the honorable mentions. Now let's begin with the actual list. At number 5 we have Princess Peach and her Echo Fighter Daisy. During the early days of Ultimate, in a similar fashion to Palutena, the upgrades to Peach and Daisy were extremely apparent, and they were placed firmly in top tier. Representatives like Mudace, Ling, Umeki, and Samsora wasted no time showcasing their strength. They were arguably the best whiff punishers in the game, a low and mid% combo game that was on par with Steve and Kazuya, and plenty of options for attack and defense by way of their ability to float. Unlike Palutena and Joker, who took hits to their utility, Peach and Daisy sustained nerfs directly to their power. Dash attack lost a considerable amount of knockback scaling right out the gate, and in version 3.1, forward air lost a decent amount of power too, enough to where it kills about 10 to 20% later at a higher percent. It doesn't seem like a lot, but trust me when I say their crown smack would end your stock below 100% at the ledge. It was like an aerial smash attack. I mean, it still is, to be honest. Back throw also lost kill power. It used to be a decent kill throw, but now not so much. Meanwhile, their down B vegetable was made more punishable on pickup. As far as the number of nerfs, there were few, but in light of them being core parts of her gameplay, they hurt a bit. Even so, they were still incredibly strong. The problem is, and I'm sure many others believe out of all the top tiers, Peach and Daisy were indirectly nerfed the most by DLC fighters. Historically, their more difficult matchups were mid-range fighters and zoners like Cloud, Samus, and Shulk who could outrange her for the entirety of the match. Then came along Byleth, Min, Sephiroth, the Aegis, and Sora, characters with very big disjoints. Others like Terry and Steve made close quarters combat very scary. The gradual evolution of the meta wasn't very kind to them, as for most people they're no longer thought of as a top 10 character, even though they were once just as scary as Palutena and Joker. I'm not sure how much I want to blame it on external circumstances given that they're circumstantial and not a direct loss of power on their part. Mutace especially has been clawing his way through tournaments in recent months, so it may not be all that big of a problem. Then again, that's why Peach and Daisy are in 5th. At number 4, we have Zero Suit Samus, frequently thought of as bottom 5 by her own flagship wielder. As a top tier in Smash 4, unlike the others we talked about so far, ZSS was given a few nerfs across her entire kit, as well as a few buffs. Overall though, she was nerfed more than buffed, but the changes in game systems worked in her favor, so ultimately she would end up more or less around the same ballpark. Perhaps not top 10, but unquestionably top 20 or top 15. Evidently though, it appears that Sakudai's team saw her as more than just a high tier, targeting her neutral game and kill setups to make them less consistent or safe to use. The first nerf came in version 7, slashing the berry duration of flip jump's grounded hit by so much that boost kick isn't a guaranteed follow-up until far later. To add more insult to injury, boost kick gained 2 more startup frames. This not only made it less consistent on buried opponents, but as an added shield option, a ladder combo finisher, or even as a follow-up to a paralyzer shot. Boost kick is just as essential to ZSS's kill power as up smash is to Fox. Not that she doesn't have other ways to close her stock, but it's a very core part of her kit. While we're on that, a core part of her neutral game is their neutral air. It has a moderate startup at frame 10 but hits both sides of her very reliably, and prior to being nerfed was completely unpunishable. I'm not even kidding, it was -2 on shield. There was not a single move in the game that was able to out of shield Zero Suit's Nair. Again, to casual players this may not seem like a whole lot, but in upper levels of play, these small quality of life nerfs were painfully discernible. Even though her representation is still relatively healthy, her performance hasn't been as stellar. The nerfs were substantial enough to make her more risky to play, especially when you look at other rushdown brawler characters who could accomplish what she does either more consistently or comfortably. Though having said that, Mars took Lost Tech City not too long ago running solo ZSS, so her story resembles Peach and Daisy's. We might see a resurgence in the future. Number 3 will raise a few eyebrows, but I decided to put Wario here. Hear me out, I'm fully aware that Gluttony is the best player in Europe and a top 5 player world despite his fierce loyalty to going solo Wario. However, Wario as a character is nowhere near as good now as he was before. He was nerfed only once in version 11, but those nerfs did serious damage to his kit, just like how they did to ZSS. First, his notorious up tilt lost 4 active frames. It used to be one of the best up tilts in the game, even more so for Wario, as it shot his opponent up above him and had just enough hit stun to where he could follow up with his infamous waft. As for said waft, the third and max level charges gained 3 more startup frames, all but completely stripping him of an easy confirm into waft as well as a weaker combo game since up tilt was one of the main ways of doing so. He still has falling up air and a well positioned nair to confirm off of, but up tilt was by far the easiest way to get this done. Why this matters so much is because countless times you would hear top players and commentators describe fighting Wario as having only 2 stocks. If you were down to your 3rd stock and Wario had a max waft primed, you were gonna die off 1 neutral loss. I know it doesn't sound as impressive nowadays, but back then, Wario's easy one-shot combo was legendary. There used to be so many top-tier Wario players like Zachary, Tweak, and Gluto, but many have dropped him in favor of other options. I'm not exaggerating when I say those nerfs really hurt. It's almost the same as when Cloud's up air lost the first active hitbox from Smash 4 to Ultimate, or when he lost permanent limit. The only reason Gluto is still taking amazing results is because he's adapted his playstyle to make use of Wario's other ways to kill like dash attack, back air, and forward tilt. You still see a waft every now and then, but people don't consider it as terrifying of a threat as it used to be. He was originally an easy contender for a top 10, but ever since the nerfs and the inclusion of new top tiers like the Aegis and Steve, Wario was booted down to being in the top 20. Still fantastic, but a shadow of his former self. At number 2 we have Olimar. Even though he's always been unpopular due to his unconventional playstyle and micromanagement of Pikmins, Olimar started off really strong in the meta early on. In fact, some went as far as to say he's a candidate for the best character in Ultimate. He's a zoner, super tiny, does way too much damage with the right Pikmin, and is generally a difficult character for many people to deal with. Like Wario, there was only one patch where Olimar received targeted nerfs, but those nerfs destroyed his top tier status. Version 3.0 and 3.1 gave him a larger hurt box, which entails a lot of consequences. He doesn't pancake certain moves by existing, he's a lot easier to hit on the ground and in the air, so on and so forth. Forward and up smash gained 3 more frames of end lag each, which is especially bad for the latter because it's one of its main combo starters at low percents. Both of them were also extremely safe on shield, notably when using either yellow or purple Pikmin. Also, its forward smash clean hit was shortened, requiring you to use it more precisely, and did less shield damage given it technically is a projectile. Once again, these nerfs don't seem like a lot, but they were a huge reason why Olimar was so dangerous. He has smash attacks that were faster than other cast members' tilts, and was ludicrously tiny. It was like trying to catch a fly with a pair of chopsticks. Something else that mattered a lot was Olimar's survivability. On top of being really small, Olimar's recovery was on par with Rob's up B in some ways, as he could act out of it albeit at the cost of free falling. With no Pikmin by his side, he could travel very far. Using his uppy in quick succession though would cause the flying Pikmin to get more and more exhausted, reducing the speed and maneuverability of Olimar. If you were able to force him off stage and keep him off stage for a while, it was very possible to gimp him. This was made even more noticeable following 3.1, taking the flying Pikmin twice as long to regenerate their flight time after each use. Olimar was the second most nerfed character in Smash Ultimate overall. At the start, he was indisputably top 3, top 5 at worst. These days, I hear some people barely putting him in high tier. We have a few noteworthy reps though, like Dabuz, Myron, and Shuton, but Dabuz has been piloting Rosalina more lately, and Shuton co-mains Olimar with Aegis. Olimar was also another character who got screwed over a fair bit from DLC fighters, as Pikmin lose to almost any sword attack. And at number 1, we have the poor baby brother, Pichu. Oh my god, this character. For context, Pichu is widely viewed as a meme character in Melee. It was so bad that a Melee player hacked into the game's files to buff Pichu in order to win tournaments. Obviously, he was caught after players became suspicious that he only wanted to play sets against others using his own setup. Regardless, Pichu was subsequently the most buffed character during his transition from Melee to Ultimate. While he still retains a lot of the same weaknesses he had before, such as being really light and hurting himself when using electricity-based moves, his speed and power were drastically magnified, turning him into a more extreme version of Pikachu. Seeing as how Pikachu is a perennial top-tier character and there's a smaller, faster, and more powerful version of him, Pichu is also a contender for the best character in the early days of the game. That being said, versions 3.0 and 3.1 were a death blow to not only Olimar but also Pichu. His hurtbox was made a lot bigger to where despite being visually smaller than Pikachu, Pichu actually has a bigger hurtbox. All moves involving electricity would damage himself even more, which is a big deal, because remember, Pichu is the lightest character in the game. Taking any damage at all is more problematic on him than on any other character. Lastly, his forward tilt, unanimously agreed on as the strongest forward tilt in the game, lost 20 units of knockback scaling, putting it on the same level as other forward tilts in kill power. These nerfs were so bad that about 3/4 of his representation were wiped out virtually overnight. It would be stretched to put him anywhere higher than maybe upper mid tier now. Pichu's extreme weaknesses were kept in check by the reward being ever so slightly worth it. Now with that gone, there's really no reason to play Pichu over his evolved form. All you're doing is making it more difficult for yourself. They did pull back a few nerfs in version 11, but in all honesty, losing that forward tilt really sucked. Was it broken? Absolutely, but Pichu kind of needed it. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if they reverted the nerf to his F tilt and he would still barely be top 20. Having a bigger hurtbox just hurts too much. I don't know, maybe the developers thought the switch from complete trash to overpowered was too jarring for Pichu explaining all the nerfs, but I still think they were too harsh. It's painful to see a character go from top 5 to not even top 30 in one patch. Okay, that about wraps up the list. Just like before, if you feel like there are other characters who deserve to be on this list more than the 7 I chose, you're welcome to share your thoughts in the comments down below. Aside from that, if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Consider following my Twitter at Vars, joining my Discord server, and if you haven't seen the previous episode on the 5 most buffed characters, I highly suggest you do so. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.